everybody, and welcome to the first podcast for the Pride 2020 program that the Queer Heritage Forum's putting together. This session today will actually be on queer representation in gaming. I'm Hannah Ayres, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Warwick, and I look at queer representation in museums and how queer individuals create, critique, and internalize these representations. And today I'm joined by my brother, Alex S.
Hi, my name's Alex. I'm not a PhD student, but I do study A-levels and I do like video games. So I'm here to add my representation and the stuff that I've seen.
Yeah, so I really actually wanted to do this session with my brother. There's other people I could have done this session with, but I think have the same mindset when it comes to games. And I think it's been really nice to introduce him to some of the queer work that I do through this podcast. So it's been good. So today, there's actually a lot out that we could have discussed, right? We're going to only cover a small minority of queer games and queer representation in gaming. And the way we're going to discuss today is we've themed some of the games. So we've got when did queer gaming start, gender diversity, light-hearted examples, modding, and the final theme is the future of queer gaming. But this is quite experimental, the way that we're doing this. So me and my brother, we did our own individual research under these various themes, and I think we're just going to put the information out there. There might be a bit of back and forth. We'll see how it goes along. So we got a lot of this information from the LGBTQ video game archive. So this site is a project created by Adrian Shaw, an associate professor at Temple Klein College of Media and Communication. I cannot overstate how incredible this resource is, and you can also volunteer by adding submissions. There's a lot of recent games that are out there that need information, and you could be the individual to help out. We're putting together a little reading list with resources, and some of these games you can play online that we're going to talk about. So we're going to create a list of resources for this podcast, and the LGBTQ video game archive will be on there, so feel free to check it out.
Yeah.
You ready to start?
Yeah, I'm ready.
So the first topic we're really going to cover is when did queer gaming start? When I say queerness, I'm talking about an umbrella term for LGBTQ+ in this context, because there's quite a lot not covered under LGBTQ+. So I wanted just to start with Caper and Castro, which was published in 1989, and though it's not the first expression of queerness in gaming, it is the first explicit representation that I saw, and I think it's incredibly interesting. So the game was a murder mystery / problem-solving game written in HyperCard on a Mac Plus. So in this game, players take the role of lesbian detective Tracker McDyke, searching for their friend and drag queen Tessie LaFemme, who's gone missing from the Castro. I say drag queen because apparently there was some misreporting around 2014 that Tessie was a trans woman, but it was originally released as charityware. This meant that anybody who downloaded it was given the option to donate funds for an AIDS organisation of their choice. Having moved from Southern California, CM Routh, the developer, wanted to do something for the LGBT community that had embraced her and her partner, whilst also honouring their friend who had died from AIDS-related illnesses. Relating to this conversation around AIDS, there's actually a plotline in the game about releasing a bacterial virus-type agent in drinks at the local bars. We found a screenshot from this plotline, and I just want to quote a little bit from that screenshot. Quote, "The house wine has been tainted with a deadly, fast-acting bacterial virus. You're about to die and there's no antidote. Sorry." End quote. And I think this really captures the kind of mood at the time with AIDS-related illnesses and the LGBT community. So the game was originally spread around on underground LGBT forums in the late 80s. Ralph refers to these as bulletin board systems, of which there was an LGBT bulletin board network that was very small and underground. So by November of 1989, only 2 individuals had been able to solve the game. A reporter for the Washington Blade, Cynthia Yockey, and a 14-year-old boy. So Ralph made another version of the game called Murder on Main Street and sold it through Heiser Software. Knowing an LGBT-related game might not be picked up by them, she straightened up the game. Included in our reading list is a version of the game that is free to play. And also you can see that article by Cynthia Yockey.
It's dark, isn't it? Gave me goosebumps. Because I don't know. I feel like from my experience, you didn't learn much about the AIDS crisis and stuff like that. So for it to be represented in games, a lot of these sort of things wouldn't get picked up by the audience. So I think education in this sort of sector needs to become more prevalent so that people get an understanding of how the LGBTQ plus community has been mistreated and just disrespected.
Yeah, definitely. There definitely needs to be a lot more education around AIDS and LGBT. I will say that we're starting off at a really tough kind of place, and some of these games will deal with subject matter that's a little bit tough, but we're hoping that as we go along, you know, it's not a straightforward picture of, oh, now it's all better, because, you know, the discourse around The Last of Us 2 shows us that's really not the case. But, you know, things are different now, and the LGBTQ plus community is a lot more prevalent in various different spaces, including gaming. So the next game I want to talk about in terms of where did queer gaming start is a game called Gayblade. So it was developed by Ryan Best in 1992, and it's absolutely another incredible explicit expression of queerness. So it was originally touted as the first LGBT game, but this title actually belongs to Caper and Castro, which we've just spoken about. So it was released on Windows and Mac, and according to the manual, quote, Gayblade takes players into an ancient and dark dungeon on a terrifying quest to rescue Empress Nelda from the disgusting right-wing creatures inhabiting the dungeon. Fortunately, the rescue party is made up of heroic drag queens, queers, lesbians, and others who will stop at nothing to get their beloved Empress back to the luxurious castle Gaykeep. But can they succeed when so many others have failed before them? End quote. So, armour in the game included leather jackets, aprons, tiaras, and condoms, and weapons in the game included purses, mace, press-on nails, and blow dryers. Enemies in the game included TVA evangelicists, young Republicans, rednecks, homophobic cops, and STIs. So the game actually received a lot of press, with Best stating that the phone was ringing day and night with calls for interviews. The game also received a lot of negative attention, which you can imagine, from those that claimed the game was sporting the homosexual agenda, quotation marks. So the game was actually rediscovered by Adrian Shaw, who we previously mentioned was the creator of the LGBTQ game archive. And Shaw interviewed Best in 2018, and Best explained that he had originally written a more mainstream game called Citadel of the Dead, but having signed a bad contract did not make any money from the sales, so he decided he would use the 40,000 lines of Dragon Blade coding to make a gay and lesbian spoof.
I think it's really interesting, like, the fact that there are people out there that do want to create, like, positive representation, because that's the real truth. The fact that the media and sort of society has demonised homosexuality and just queerness in general for so long, it's old news now, come on.
I actually think it's really interesting because this game's so explicitly queer, and so was the last one before it was straightened up, you know, and as we go along, I think queerness has become more, I don't want to say co-opted, or more mainstream games have moved more towards realistic representation.
Yeah.
Potentially we're losing this silly, explicit queerness. Also, I don't play a lot of indie games, so maybe this is an area I'm missing out. You can let us know.
And except Grand Theft Auto. But we will come to that in time. Right, my game that I've chosen is called Fubar versus the DEA. It was made in 1996 by Richard Cross, and in this game, the main character is called Fubar, and you're on a mission to save your boyfriend Ned, who has been captured by the DEA, the US Drug Enforcement Agency. When this game was released, there were reviews and posts that merely referred to Ned as Fubar's friend, or friend in quotation marks. The game very clearly refers to Ned as Fubar's boyfriend, however. There are also gay-coded references in this game, including a pink triangle on the forehead of Fubar, and the targeting system was also a pink triangle. There were power-ups, such as the rainbow flag for an extra life, or a condom with an American flag on it as a protective shield. For me, it's quite odd how reviewers attempted to sort of perpetuate heteronormativity, especially considering like the cultural changes during the 1990s in America, especially on a legal basis. In 1994, fear of persecution due to sexual orientation became grounds for asylum in the United States. So like America was accepting those who were being persecuted. What do you think about that? The fact that these reviewers of the game were sort of making the game heteronormative, even though America was sort of seen as a place of safety.
I get where you're coming from. Also, you're coming from a very different place from me. Basically, I see heteronormativity in a lot of different things, not just in gaming. You see it in a lot of things. We'll get to it, but in The Last of Us 2, some of the material they've now been releasing since the controversy with Abby actually doesn't include Abby anymore. So, I haven't seen Abby since the controversies happened. Yeah. Maybe I'm not seeing it all, maybe I'm just catching glimpses of it, but this normalizing of queer bodies and queer experiences happens all the time in different places, and it's not stopped happening, to be honest. So for me, it doesn't surprise me. Maybe that's me being super negative.
That is sad, and we will get to The Last of Us for those who don't know about the drama and the controversy. Don't worry, you're not out of the loop.
So the next theme and topic we're talking about is actually gender diversity in gaming, because I personally have got quite a lot of games for this. When I'm talking about gender diversity, I'm talking about trans individuals, intersex individuals that don't fit the binary of male, female, or individuals that are genderqueer or non-binary. So in essence, any kind of interesting gendered experience in gaming. So the first game I actually have to bring up is Metroid. So in the original Metroid, which was developed in 1986, Samus's gender is not revealed until the very end of the game. So in the US manuals, actually the player character was referred to as he, and in Japanese manuals they were referred to as it. In the press from that era, Samus was described as being 6'3" and 198 pounds. The character wears a spacesuit throughout, and at the end of the game, the suit is removed and Samus appears wearing a bikini and boots. So this end reveal has actually become a common theme in Metroid games as a kind of reward. Samus's character has been slowly altered to become more feminine presenting. So they've made her smaller, given her a bigger chest. Many articles, however, are quick to point out this change in appearance does not erase Samus's gender diverse beginnings. So in a 1994 interview, artist Hirofumi Matsuoka suggested that Samus was transgender, specifically using the term new half, which is actually kind of difficult to translate directly into English as its meanings in Japanese are ambiguous. So we also can't say if this was a joke.
I think it's quite interesting how they did make Metroid. Maybe it was a comment to say that it's not just men that can sort of be that hero, be that super soldier. Maybe it was a comment that women are stronger than men in some aspects. But that sort of area you're talking about, that it's like that sexualization is a reward, is sort of, I think, appealing to the dominant male culture of gaming, especially when was it, 1986?
Yeah, I was gonna say that there's been a lot of talk about Samus as kind of a feminist icon, right? Like this idea that you don't know who this character is. And actually, from what I could tell, it was quite shocking, this reveal that Samus was a woman. So yeah, we don't know what exactly this was. I think it's very interesting that the use of pronouns regarding this character in the manuals is actually a way to hide the fact that she is a woman at the end, rather than potentially this character being trans. But also, there's still this interesting gender diversity in this history, and I know a lot of people see Samus as trans, and that's really empowering for them.
Yeah, it's about your own interpretations at the end of the day, isn't it? That's what video games are for. They're for you to escape the norms of society, sort of the drag every day, sort of go to a place where you feel comfortable. I think when games include representation for people of all genders, creeds, etc., then I think that is really sort of what gaming is meant to be. Alright, so in the topic of gender diversity, I've chosen a game that's called Nights into Dreams. It was made in 1995. Now, when I talk about the games I'm talking about, I'm just giving brief sort of look into the sort of the representation in them. You want to find out about the game's story, just check the reading list. So, the main character in Nights into Dreams is designed to be a gender-neutral character, as Yuji Naka, sorry for the pronunciation if that was wrong, a producer and programmer for Nights into Dreams, states in an interview with nightsintodreams.com, the residents in the dream world shouldn't have a gender, rather the form of the characters should be determined by the person who is dreaming. This is very good, because dreams for people are personal personal and allow us to escape from the everyday trudge of life. So gender assignments are irrelevant in this game, just like in our dreams, because the assumed norm doesn't apply. And I think that's just really powerful, this representation that dreams are personal to us. They're our comforts, our everyday situations sort of mixed up and processed in our brains.
I think that's really interesting. Only because, actually, in terms of recording, I recorded the other two podcasts before this one, and we were talking about ways that potentially this could be a cop-out.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it is, but it's a way of saying, I made them gender neutral, so they have the gender of the people in the dreams. But most people wouldn't think, oh, it's gender neutral, it's non-binary. They would think, oh, you know, I'm a woman, and so the things in my dreams are going to be female presenting or women.
I believe the way the characters look, there's no sort of gender conformities. I may be wrong, but I think the main character does not have any sort of masculine, feminine traits or anything of the sort. It's sort of just gender neutral. I think that's where that representation comes from.
So my next one is taking us back a few years from Alex's one that he just presented. Next I'm going to talk about Birdo from Super Mario. So the character Birdo first appeared in 1987 in a game called Doki Doki Panic. This game was later altered and released under the name Super Mario Bros. 2. So the character looks like a dinosaur that's hot pink, and they have a big red bow on their head and very prominent lashes. So it's very, you know, like the things can be associated with very female things. So this character's gender has been up for debate, with the LGBTQ Gaming Archive actually labeling this character as transgender implicit. So the original manual stated, quote, Ostro, he thinks he is a girl and he spits eggs from his mouth. He'd rather be called Birdetta, end quote. So the language present in this manual has raised problems. It can be read as kind of transphobic, you know, like this idea that he thinks he's a girl, you know, it's transphobic language. And it's also caused some dispute in communities with whether this character is actually trans, is, you know, what gender is this character. So in Japan, Birdo is known as Catherine. And in Super Smash Bros. Brawl in 2008, that stated that Birdo's gender is indeterminate and refers to them as it. So it's actually interesting how much discourse stems from the discussion of characters that aren't human and don't claim to represent humanity. You know, like Birdo is not trying to be a human in any way. But there's still kind of clear attempts to quash this queerness in all its forms. And Nintendo, by the way, are problematic in their representations of queerness. But they've not helped this matter by being evasive regarding this character. So it seems kind of silly to argue the gender of Birdo, but representation matters in the many forms that it takes. And if it didn't matter, why are people trying to squash it?
I think to the kids that are playing these Super Mario games and those kids growing up who may be questioning like what they're comfortable with, they may not look to Birdo as their icon unless they researched it. You're right, Nintendo is very evasive. They don't sort of make it obvious. It's as if they're just trying to forget that the queer community exists. And I think there are a lot of game producers out there that need to do a better job at representing the queer community and the different diversity of genders, because I think a lot of those companies that do it, like especially the big ones with the AAA games, sometimes do a poor job because they're trying to not upset one audience and they're like don't want to be accused of pandering. They're just trying to please too many people at once.
Yeah, I think if this was never brought up, you know, if it was just like Birdo, like whatever. But from what I've seen, you know, this is a thing that people look to. They do talk about it, you know, maybe in small spaces, but it's still being talked about. So just having answers, I think, is nice. So my next game is Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Trials and Tribulations that was created in 2004. I love Phoenix Wright, the whole series. Gene Armstrong is a gay male character in this game, and he appears in all pink chef's outfit. He has a goatee, a mustache, and really big muscular arms. He's also not French, which helps to explain his misspelling of his own restaurant's name, Très Bien. Armstrong owns a French restaurant and conducts his business in his French-made drag persona named Clarice Armstrong. This persona is what you see most of the time when you play this game, and Clarice is a flamboyant, flirtatious individual, and she coloured the restaurant pink after her favourite colour. When the game was translated into English, there were some questions questions raised due to the vague descriptions of Armstrong's gender and sexuality. Janet Hugh, an employee of Capcom who works in English localization, penned a blog post discussing various aspects of the Ace Attorney series. According to Hugh, Gene Armstrong is a cisgender gay man who operates his business-related dealings in his drag persona, which is intentionally non-passing. Hugh states that had the game been released more recently, the team would likely have been more specific with pronoun usage in explaining Armstrong's identity. She also states that she would prefer now to have characters reference Gene using female pronouns out of respect for his drag persona. So I think this one's particularly interesting. One, because there's as we just spoke about with Nintendo, there was no specific answers, right? Whereas a person involved in the localization team not only came out and said, this is how the character identifies, but also a little bit of a sorry, an apology for the way the game was localized.
I think that's very good of them to come out and apologise for how it was localised. For myself and any of those who don't know, what does localised mean?
Basically, localization is when... So the game was made in Japan, but then they have to translate everything over to English. Yeah. And there's some language around gender in Japan that's quite hard to translate into English. So when they translated it over, they weren't very specific in terms of pronoun usage. Yeah. There are little bits where I think Phoenix quips about Armstrong's gender. There's little bits and they believe it's a little bit transphobic. I would need to look again.
I get it now. No, that is very, very good of them to come out and apologise. Was the issue fixed?
They can't fix it. They can't go in and change it, unfortunately.
Well, at least there was an apology.
Yeah, there was, or even just an explanation of what had happened. And moving on, I want to go back to Mario, but actually talk about a more recent game, Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, which was created in 2004. And it's interesting to look at this game with relation to Birdo and the way Birdo's gender was treated. So Vivienne is a character that appears in this game. This character is a ghost-like creature that's purple with pink and white striped hat, pink hair and white gloves, and little pink cheeks. And in the Japanese version of the game, Vivienne is described as a trans woman, although, in problematic ways. An example of this is a party member description that states, quote, "One of the shadow group, Vivienne, appears to be a girl but really is a boy," end quote. So similar to the way that Birdo was treated, but this is in 2004. So actually, I wanted to bring this up because in the English version, Vivienne is rewritten to be a cis character. So taking that previous quote that you've just heard as an example, in the English version, this reads as, quote, "One of the shadow sirens, Vivienne suffers from a bit of an inferiority complex," end quote. So they not only erase this trans identity, they also insult Vivienne.
Nintendo, you never learned, do you? Honestly, you'd think someone over at the media team for Nintendo would turn around and go, "Oh look, we've just completely erased a trans character." The representation for those out there.
And also, I would like to say this here, right? That a lot of these games are Japanese that we're talking about. And to be honest, I've done a little bit of research, but I do not know the specific ways that gender works in Japan. So, we have to contextualize sexuality and gender identities within their own context. We're coming from the UK, talking about Japanese games, right? Yeah. So I think there's an element of that there. But also, I don't know, localization teams should know, right?
I think the biggest audience of games, like Capcom and like Nintendo, and these companies that are sort of, I think these big companies that are based in Asia, in like Japan, China, places like that, they are selling their games to a larger audience. It's a worldwide audience. So I think it's also their duty as well to sort of have these really good localization teams, sort of that study our culture and how these games are going to come across to us, as well as we have that duty as well.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
Right, so the next game I've got is Mass Effect from 2007. Now, this was 3 years after Paper Mario, yeah? And first off, just going away from gender diversity a little bit, because I have to stick this in there, we have to give Mass Effect some kudos, some credit for the variety you are able to show your sexuality. Yeah. It is groundbreaking.
I will say, I'm going to talk about Dragon Age a little bit later, but BioWare, to be honest, older examples are a little bit not as well developed as they could be, but newer examples incredible.
In this game, you can be an asexual commander shepherd that focuses on their mission. You can be gay or bisexual, depending on who you're interested in. You can pursue multiple relationships or even have sex without bothering to invest in romance. It is literally, I think, one of the most realistic interpretations of sexuality in video games, and that's back in 2007. Just the freedom. Anyway, however, there are issues with representation of gender within the Mass Effect series. So you have John Shepard acting as the default protagonist. He's on the main cover. He's the male version of the protagonist you can play. Some felt that the character creation was too restrictive, particularly in terms of body type. Regardless of customization, however, some of the dialogue throughout the game remains unchanged and feel as though it was designed for John Shepard more than it was for Jane, the other female character you can pick. So the issues with gender diversity need to be and simply could be addressed. For example, why don't they just include 3 character options? Jane Shepard, John Shepard, and then just Shepard, for those who didn't want to assign, and the dialogue options could easily be edited for whichever option you desire. For example, a gender-neutral pronouns. Simply, if they can make games that make you question if it's actually real, then they should be able to have this option in terms of Mass Effect, especially for a game that's set in a futuristic society.
I think that's really interesting. Particularly, I'm going to focus in less so on the gender diversity, but actually on this idea of the female protagonist being sidelined. I think we've seen a development of these kind of politics, right? Unless I'm remembering this incorrectly. Do you know that Assassin's Creed game where you could play a
Unity.
woman? Yeah, is it Unity?
Yeah.
The woman was shown just as much as the man. Do you know there were complaints about that? And also, I think that's got some queerness in it. So potentially we're moving past this. I think it's interesting. But also, yeah, kudos to BioWare because I love them.
Right, I'm going again. So, we're going to be talking about Fable 2 from 2008. In Fable 2, after completing the main game, there is a side quest in which the player can obtain the Potion of Transmogrification. I hope I've spelled that right and pronounced it right. Basically, this potion simply allows you to switch genders, but we'll come to things around that later. To access the quest, the player must first buy Fairfax Castle for 1 million gold. Taking this potion will irreversibly change the player character from male to female, or female to male. And I find this really interesting, sort of that irreversible change.
I don't know if this idea of an irreversible change also reinforces this binary around gender. You know, it's a touchy subject for a lot of people, but realistically, you know, a very small portion of trans individuals detransition. Or, you know, you get people that transition and then decide, actually, no, you know, I'd rather identify as non-binary or genderqueer. You know, it's not just a one-way system. Yeah. Is what I would like to say.
Oh, I get that. But could you also say that it does a better job than, well, the games from Nintendo where they're saying, oh, she thinks a boy, for example, and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Where it sort of is almost mocking.
Yeah. Because, like, this game as well, not to cut in on what you're about to say, but once you do transition in this game, I believe some people talk about it. So, yeah.
I sort of wrote a small little piece about this, sort of coming from the heart. So someone that, I may not be a queer theorist, but I can sort of see what it's trying to represent. Could this in-game grind to achieve this potion loosely represent the financial, emotional cost, as well as the personal time when transitioning in real life, and be a comment by the producers that for those who wish to transition, they have to go through so much just to feel comfortable with who they are, highlighting issues in our own society about the discrimination of those who wish to transition. I don't know, but it's not like you can simply just buy this potion from the local merchant in the game. Like, you have to go through a whole process just to reach this aspect of the game. Following the transformation, NPCs will comment, "Did you used to be a man?" if the player was a male. Any spouses whose sexuality makes them incompatible with the player character's new gender will no longer have sex with them. In some, only bisexual spouses continue to be attracted to you after transitioning. Although you can also give this some gratitude for its realism, it still in a small way represents the aspects of discrimination that those who have transitioned transitioned face, the constant need to explain and even defend one's own process for transitioning, even though it's what makes you feel comfortable. Now, I may be overanalyzing here. I don't know, there seems to just be something about it.
You've definitely got the makings of a queer theorist. All we ever do is overanalyze. But no, I think that's a really interesting reading of the game. Whether that was the producer's intention, I would question. But I think it's a really interesting reading of this transitioning in gender that actually, you don't see a lot represented in games. Yeah. Like this process of transitioning.
Because it's not like the game just lets you switch back and forth and nothing's ever said. Like, the in-game characters are just like, oh, whatever, like in most games.
So, I want to move on to talking about the game Nier. So, this game was released in 2010, and the storyline of Nier is primarily concerned with kind of broken bodies, right? I would really highly recommend checking out this game. It's a little bit old in terms of mechanics, but I think it's still really interesting and well worth it. So all the main characters embody this idea of broken bodies in some way or another, although this is potentially troubling for the representation I'm about to talk about. So Kane, one of the main characters in Nier, is actually intersex and identifies as a woman. So when you begin a second playthrough, the player is given the option to read some post-game content, so you have to finish the whole game to then get to this post-game content. And this content's called Kane's Dreams. This is comprised of a series of short stories presented as a visual novel. And through this, the player learns that Kane is intersex and that based on the society she was born into, her body could be coded as male and female, human and shade, which is...
It's an aspect of the game.
Yeah, it's an aspect of the game. And because she cannot be categorized, she's then marginalized. It's stated repeatedly throughout the game that she'd been subject to exacerbated persecution from others due to being intersex, but also because in-game she's part shade. So the game has multiple endings, but if the player character chooses to sacrifice themselves for Kane, the game data, the save data, gets completely erased, and everyone forgets that your player character ever existed. In a fantastic post written by Kayla Coates that's going to be on the reading list, they stated that in this moment, quote, Nier privileges the marginalized Kane in a sort of unexpected narrative apotheosis. To me, as a trans person, this ending means everything. Maybe there is some value to be found within the edges of this broken, beautiful body of mine. End quote.
Damn. That's some poetry.
I know, right?
Wow, that is really interesting. So the game just ends. Save gets corrupted, basically.
Yeah, your save gets deleted. Something similar happens in Nier Automata. And actually, I wouldn't say this is particularly queer. No, I wouldn't say it's queer as in it's representing queer people, but it's queering the way games are played. So in Nier Automata, spoiler alert, there's an ending you can get to where... So you have to fight the credits. And by the way, this is impossible to do if you're not connected to the internet. Do not even attempt it. I could not do it, right? So I had to connect to the internet. But once you're connected to the internet, other player characters, so other people, play along with you and help you fight these credits, which, by the way, it's like...
Space Invaders.
Yeah, kind of like Space Invaders. A little bit like that. But like a really like hard version of that. And then at the very end, right, so you've had all these people fight with you and there's this big operatic song happening, and in the background, like the people whose credits coming down, they start to join in the song in terms of what you're listening to. At the very end, once you've defeated it, you get the option to delete all your save data, right? Delete all your progress and offer it up to somebody else. So you find out the people that have been helping you fight these credits are people that did that. So they deleted their save data to offer it up for somebody else.
Wow. How did they do that? What?
So I think Nier is really interesting in terms of how it queers the way gaming is done, right?
I think it is very interesting in general, just the sorts of lengths that sort of game producers are going to create these meaningful endings that sort of shock the character, if you get what I mean, and the players. But next, unfortunately, we're going to have to go to Grand Theft Auto 5. Rockstar. Oh, Rockstar. So, within Grand Theft Auto 5, there are transgender characters that appear. The most visible transgender people in this segment of the series are sex workers, who can be found in groups primarily outside of the purchasable gay bar within the game. Both the visual and narrative are designed to imply these sex workers are transgender. They're depicted with primarily muscular bodies, broad shoulders, and facial features that are primarily associated with masculinity. The dialogue within the game is also designed to imply that these characters are transgender. As a player, upon approaching a group of transgender sex workers, one of the potential dialogues that can be heard is, "Hello sir, I mean madam, I mean whatever." The dialogue is constructed to present the characters as gender non-conforming, causing apparent confusion within the player character. I think overall, for such a modern game that is meant to represent realism, because the game is based on a mock version of like Los Angeles in America, its representation of gender diversity and the LGBTQ community is actually quite offensive. Although this can be attributed to the playable character's personality, it's playing off outdated stereotypes that the earlier games in the series promotes. Example, over the sexualization of gay characters in the Ballad of Gay Tony, which simply portrays homosexuality/homosexual relationships as a sex act and doesn't hold it to the same standards as heterosexual relationships. However, to be devil's advocate, you can interpret that dialogue in many different ways. So, "Hello sir, I mean madam, I mean whatever," could be a comment on how we live in an uneducated society that doesn't yet fully understand gender diversity. I saw this because Rockstar Games, it's a massive company with thousands of employees, and the potential that they're all heterosexual is very unrealistic. However, the history of Rockstar's offensive representations and stereotypes should not be ignored.
I think that, and I looked into Grand Theft Auto when I was doing kind of the preliminary looking around, Grand Theft Auto's done some awful stuff, and they've done some awful stuff that's very deliberate, right? But basically there's a lot of background jokes that imply a knowledge of queer communities for you to get the joke. So, this implies they, one, have this knowledge to make the joke in the first place, and they're very comfortable making queer communities and trans individuals the butt of the joke. I don't know, I would literally just put this down to straight up homophobia and transphobia. Maybe the Ballad of Gay Tony was a way to deflect some of this criticism. Yeah. But I think the criticism of the Grand Theft Auto is still valid. And Grand Theft Auto the audience is primarily younger teenage boys, right?
Yeah.
I'm not implying all young teenage boys are cisgendered or straight, just saying that it's playing to this damaging, toxic masculinity, right? Moving on to a more positive representation of gender diversity, right? Because some of these have been quite negative and quite loaded in negativity. I'm going to move on to talking about Dragon Age Inquisition, right? That was created in 2014. I love the Dragon Age series. I could talk for hours and hours and hours about it. I really do love this series with all my heart. I know all the lore, it's really sad, but it's true. And their use of queer representation has actually been really marvellous in a lot of places. Here, though, I really want to talk about the character Krem. So, Krem is the first trans character to appear in a BioWare game. It's not the first trans character to be in Dragon Age as a series, but the other individual we haven't seen, they've just been spoken about. So, they actually are discussed explicitly within the game, that their trans identity is discussed explicitly within the game, but in a more natural way, I would say. It's more realistic rather than natural. So, it doesn't ever feel like a forced topic of discussion. You can dip into this discussion if you wish. And Krem feels like a fleshed out character. Although, honestly, I wish we could see more of him. He's not a companion, but he is a companion of your companion. So you do see him, and you can talk to him. But he doesn't come along with your missions. So in the context of the world, Iron Ball states that Krem fits the Qunari, and Qunari are, big horned creatures that have a complex religious doctrine. Alex is playing a Qunari at the moment. They have a complex religious doctrine, of which Iron Ball is a Qunari. Iron Ball states that Krem fits the Qunari concept of Akun Athlock, which translates in the world as, quote, born as one gender but living like another, end quote. So Iron Ball specifically states, Krem asks Iron Ball, how would the Qunari see me? And Iron Ball states that Akun Athlock are treated as the gender that they are, that they identify as. Yeah. So Iron Ball states that Krem would be treated as the man he is. It's specifically using that language.
So I don't get, how are these big-horned religious sort of zealots, as they're portrayed in the game, more accepting of gender diversity than Donald Trump is? You know what I'm saying? Right? It's ridiculous.
We actually spoke about this, and I'm not going to take away from that conversation. You can go listen to the cartoon podcast when it comes out, but we spoke a little bit how cartoons and animation are reality adjacent, right? These are not my words, by the way. They're Jamie's from that podcast. But this idea that it's both a representation of reality in a way, but it's also removed from reality enough that we can have these discussions around gender diversity and sexuality because it's not a true representation of real life.
But maybe it should be.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So the last one in gender diversity, and I told you that we had quite a lot to speak about in terms of gender diversity. I think it's really important to speak about, particularly now with what's going on. But Sims 4 began in 2014. It's still in development in terms of they're adding stuff to the game. And updates. So this game is not finished, right? But it began in 2014. The actual series, the Sims series, began in the year 2000. And it's a life simulation game for anybody who's not played it, set in fictional suburban neighborhoods. I bring up this game for two reasons. The ability to have queer pregnancies and the gender customization options that were added in 2016. So from The Sims 2, published in 2004, to The Sims 4, published in 2014, there's been a chance for male pregnancy to occur as a possible outcome of alien abduction. And fans have further used this coding of male pregnancy in the game to create mods that allow characters of any gender to reproduce with anybody and become pregnant. We'll talk a little bit more about mods later. In June 2016, Maxis added an update that they worked on with GLAD. So GLAD are a company that works on LGBTQ+ representation in gaming. They do awards, they produce reports in terms of media. And this update that they worked on allowed players to customize the genders of their character. This is still restricted to the binary of male and female, but then the player can make decisions on the physical frame, clothing preferences, fertility, and how Sims use the toilet. There's also a spectrum of 6 voices for all Sims and the ability to turn off filters for masculine or feminine clothing and hairstyles. Gender specifications can also change at any point in the game. So you could play a character, for example, that transitions, so you change their gender specifications. So unfortunately, there's not actually a mechanic for customizing the genders of children, although this might just be because younger age stages in Sims 4 are undeveloped on a whole, and the filters for gendered clothing and hairstyles can be turned off for them. So apparently this was a decision that was influenced by the amount of modders that had been removing these restrictions for years. There's quite a few issues with the way that Sims presents queerness. For one, unless you're directly looking for it, right? Are you ever going to run into this? I don't know if this is an issue as such. I would just say it's kind of background queerness. It's not in your face. So the pronoun usage in Sims 4 is still an issue as it still retains this male-female binary. But still, this seems like a step in the right direction, and I'm going to be really interested to see the decisions that are made in Sims 5.
Again, when we go to talk about mods, we will talk about the power of roleplay, especially when you add mods to the game. It's up to the person playing the game how they want to play it. Right, moving on, we're going to talk about some light-hearted stuff. It's about time. We've been talking about some very hostile sort of things. Anyway, my game is from 1992 and it's called Rex Nebula and the Cosmic Gender Bender. Now, this game is very it's lighthearted. It's quite comedic in its sort of representations. So the main character Rex crash lands on a planet where a war between the sexes resulted in the extermination of all men. Goodbye. Due to the extermination of all men, there is now a mechanic that the females on the planet have created. It's called the Cosmic Gender Bender machine. It was developed by the women on the planet that Rex crashed on in the game. It allows the Keepers, which are a class of women, which are quite sort of high up, to change into biological men for short periods of time so they may impregnate the stock women. This is described as unpleasant for the women, however, and because it wears off at unpredictable moments. There are apparently awkward moments. The machine is in the shape of a penis as well, which I think is quite funny.
Is this know it's in the light-hearted section.
I was
but
going to
is
say
this
it's a
not
little bit offensive.
Yeah, isn't it a little bit transphobic? A little bit?
It is funny in some sense because it's sort of playing on the wall between the sexes and it's not meant to be too serious. However, it could be interpreted as that transition isn't a permanent thing, which devalues the lives of those who have transitioned.
Yeah, so I think it's lighthearted in the sense that it's trying to be funny, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of things use queer gender, queer sexuality is the butt of the joke. I'm not trying to bring down your lighthearted section.
Are we going to excuse it because it was made in 1992?
No, because I have something from 1992.
Get rid of Cosmic Gender Bender, Rex
Cosmic
Nebula.
Gender Bender can take a backseat. In Final Fantasy V, that was released in 1992, Faris is a pirate captain and playable character. The character's fairly androgynous looking, and it's later revealed in the game that they were born female but raised male by the pirates. They reportedly refer to themselves as male and female throughout the game, and in this same game, the main character, Bart Clauser, has been interpreted as gay or bisexual. So Bart appears to be attracted to Faris before the characters realise that Faris was born a woman. Bart continues to express an attraction to Faris when they later come out wearing an elegant dress, hence some fans interpreting this as evidence of his bisexuality.
Well, that's very interesting, I think. Like, sorry, Rex Nebula, but kinda did it wrong, didn't you? Like, whew. No, but I think that just, it's nice.
Yeah, it's just nice. This is lighthearted. This is nice.
Welcome to the lighthearted section. The next game is called Earthbound. It was made in 1994. Hannah likes this one very much. So, in the game, Tony is the best friend and roommate of Jeff, one of Nessa's party members in Earthbound. He is rumoured to have an unrequited crush on Jeff. This is evidenced by a letter Jeff reads at the end of the game. Dear Jeff, everything's really going great here. I wish I could have gone with you on your adventure, even just part of this way, but instead I'm sitting here, waiting for you in Winters. I want to see you again as soon as possible. I can't wait to see your cheerful face. I bet your glasses are dirty. When you come back, I'll clean them for you. Like I said, I'm waiting for you. Yours truly, Tony. P.S. Don't show this letter to anyone. So after the release of Mother 3, which was another game made by the series creator, they said explicitly that Tony was meant to be a young gay character. It's actually quite interesting because when looking at Tony's character, he does have quite sort of heteronormative sort of masculine sort of features. Like he's got a beard, he's like wearing sort of a suit and a hat and stuff. How heteronormative. I don't know, he looks like a businessman, I suppose. I thought this was really nice, simply because it portrays homosexual relationships as equal to heterosexual relationships, and this isn't done much in games. Like, it's heartwarming, and the lack of that over-sexualisation that some games do, for example Grand Theft Auto, for a game in the 1990s, it makes a mockery of games with offensive references that have come after it. It's not pandering, it's just real.
Moving very far on from Earthbound in terms of time. I say very far on. This is 2017. So, Nier Automata, which I previously spoke about, I love this game. If you have not played this game yet, please give it a go. It's got a lot of interesting philosophical elements and conversations that happen within the game that really make you think, and maybe you're not playing games for that, but I like anything that destroys my spirit. I bring this up here because of Operator 60. This is a female android who's often depicted as quite emotional, contrasting with the main character 2B as she tries to remain detached from the task at hand and emotionless. She rings 2B occasionally, and one of the times she rings crying because she'd actually asked another female android out on a date and got rejected. It's implied that she has feelings for the main character 2B, and there's actually a rather sweet side quest where 2B can collect photos of flowers to send to her. This is an extra sweet gesture, as 60 lives on a space station and cannot come to Earth herself, but is obsessed with Earth culture. So yeah, you can enact queerness here if you choose to within this game, and I just think it's nice.
Yeah. The next game we're about to talk about, it's just a bit amazing, isn't it? Dream Daddy Simulator, produced in 2018, made by Game Grumps. So this game, I bought this for Hannah not too long ago. Firstly, what did you think about it?
It's so cute. Do you know how stressed I was when you bought it me? And then I just sat down and I'm just like a dad dating other dads. And also, I don't know if you're going to touch on it, but there's trans representation in the game. You can, as a dad, you can wear a binder so you can decide whether you're trans or not. One of the characters in the game is trans, like one of the dads you can date. And it's just really nice. Like, it's just very sweet and lovely.
Dream Daddy Simulator is a dad dating simulator, as already said. It's an interactive visual novel and dating simulator where the player customises their own dad character and is able to date 7 different dads while balancing an at-home life with a daughter in her senior year, applying to art school/college. A big controversy that relates to the difficulty in labelling these characters is their sexualities, as the game never really explicitly labels the terminology. So the game creators had this to say, however. I think we already have a lot of media that spends a lot of time talking about those kinds of feelings and navigating through the coming out process and grappling with your own sexuality. I think those narratives are important for sure, but I just want to fast forward to the part where we can have the stories and the queer characters that are not explicitly about them being queer. I can see why the game creators have made the game this way. So we live in a world that is corrupted by confusion, fear, discrimination, etc. Like the creators said, it's a prominent topic in the media, so we have this form of media that focuses on the positive side of things. It's refreshing and potentially inspiring to those who are coming to terms with their own sexualities.
I think this representation is really interesting. One, it's actually a representation of people of colour. That's not a thing that you often get in games. In terms of queerness, that's not an area that's often covered by games because games really cover, kind of white queerness. But I think also that this game, it covers real queerness, right? Like, I know many people and I've heard many stories of individuals who, they've had babies and they've dated women and they've been married to women, and then they come out of these relationships and actually, now I want to explore another part of my life. There's a lot of fluidity. I think it really captures this fluidity really nicely. One of the characters that you can date that I haven't dated, so I don't know the storyline. I know there was a bit of controversy because there was like a conspiracy storyline put in there. But one of the characters in the game is married with 3 children, and you can choose to pursue him. I think that storyline ends negatively, but I don't know. But yeah, I think it's interesting. One of the people that you can date is Craig. He has 3 kids. He's previously been in a relationship. You can decide at the beginning, by the way, not only can you decide if you're trans, you can also decide if you were in a relationship with a woman or a man, and you can also decide if you adopted your daughter. So I think it's really interesting. This
it gives a lot of freedom.
Yeah, in terms of how I role-played a trans man who'd been in a relationship with a gay man, and we'd adopted a baby, and I think it's really sweet. Moving on to my last light-hearted queer example, and I want to talk about Outer Worlds. So this is a game that was released in 2019, and it plays kind of like Fallout, but in space, and actually I've been really enjoying it. So I particularly love the companions in this game. They're incredible. Some of the game mechanics are a little bit clunky, right? But actually the storytelling is done really well.
It's focused on the narrative.
So one companion in particular, and one of my favourite characters in the game, is Parvati, also a person of colour. So Parvati expresses her interest in a female engineer, and she also discusses her feelings around being asexual. So during her personal quest, you are setting her up on a date with Jun-Lee Tennyson, the aforementioned engineer. So she expresses a nervousness at not being able to do the kind of physical stuff, and you get the option to encourage her to pursue Jun-Lee or not, and kind of support her around her fears, right? So one of the lines during her personal quest is, quote, I don't like physical affection. That's, it's tripped people up in the past. Folks I thought that cared about me for me, end quote. So I encouraged her to go out and have a relationship with Jun-Lee, and I ended up feeling really satisfied when I saw her gush about how happy she was and how well the date went, and I just think it's really lovely. Maybe it's not realistic, the relationship happens so quickly. She's like, can we go and see Jun-Lee? I heard because also Parvati is an engineer, so she wants to go talk to this other engineer she's heard about, and then she instantly falls head over heels. And she immediately wants to go out on a date, and you have to do all this extravagant stuff. So maybe it's not realistic, but honestly, I think sometimes queer characters just need a happy ending.
Definitely.
And also it's a representation of asexuality that you don't get very often.
Right, let's move on to modding. Now, with this section and the games I talk about, I did sort of free roam and do my own research because I own all these games and I've sort of looked into them and I sort of like delved into finding queer representation and LGBTQ plus representation. And what I found with the modding in games is that it's a bit good, it's a bit bad. It's a sort of a two-sided coin of the different communities. So I focused on two games, firstly, Fallout and Skyrim. So Skyrim is an RPG that is close to my heart in terms of my favourite games, and it's disheartening to dissect its problems. For example, the over-sexualisation of the female form in the base game and especially in the modding community, as well as a lack of LGBTQ plus representation. However, modding allows the creators to implement changes to the game to suit their needs. There are a few examples of LGBTQ plus modders that have used this creation kit to implement representation. For example, within Skyrim you can change all the flags around the cities to the pride flag, and there's also realistic female armor mods instead of the base game over-sexualized or the other modders that just make massive breasts, as well as showing there is also options to have male hair options for female characters and vice versa. Also, it may be disputed, but in the character creation menu the option for choosing your sex is just 2 options. It doesn't officially put a title on it as male or female, so it creates the options for role playing and you can define your character however you feel. Maybe I'm just analytical with bias because this is my favourite game and it's sad to see those negative aspects. But then unfortunately the same goes for Fallout. Both games can be modded however, and within Fallout there's the craftable pride flag mod which offers much more diverse sort of different flag options as like the asexual flag, and I'm not an expert but there's like 16 different flags from what I looked at. There is also, on the PC version of the game, same-sex couples mod and the LGBTQ families mod, which adds more diversity to the actual game structure. So you see like these same-sex couples and they have kids and stuff like that, and it just creates a more, I don't know, immersive world.
So we're going to have a larger conversation around modding once we presented some examples. But actually mine's just a little bit of a fun example. So in the Metal Gear Solid series, there's a character, Revolver Ocelot. And I'm going to specifically be referring, in terms of modding, to Metal Gear Solid 5 that was released in 2015. So Ocelot's sexuality has been debated, with some asserting that he's in love with Big Boss, that he flirts with him, or that their relationship is homoerotic. There's also been an Easter egg in which the player has to not press anything when Liquid Ocelot has Snake in a headlock. And Ocelot will then kiss Snake on the cheek. So, there's also a play around with this homoeroticism within the game. So potentially this implies that the developers are aware of the theories around Ocelot's sexuality, particularly as allowing this to happen earns the player the "you're pretty good" trophy for the game. But the reason I bring up this series in terms of modding is because of a mod that players made for Metal Gear Solid 5. So this game has notoriously got a problematic character called Quiet. If you haven't seen the character, she wears a rather ill-fitting bra and pants, a black bra and pants, and over the pants are ripped tights, and she's in a war zone. The lore in-game states that she has to wear this outfit because she has to breathe through her skin. I mean, I love the Metal Gear Solid series, right? But that is tragic. That's literally tragic. So modders got to work and swapped out the character Quiet for Ocelot, thus erasing some of the misogyny present in the game and adding queerness. And I'm going to leave a few YouTube videos and a few clips for you to look at in the reading list. Even if you never play the game, just look at the way that Ocelot moves in these cutscenes because it's amazing. There's one scene where you're in a helicopter and the character Quiet, but in this mod, Ocelot, drops out of the helicopter and starts like writhing around around in the rain and spinning around and dancing, and it's incredible to see Ocelot do this. So this queerness also, kind of makes incredibly clear the misogyny present in Quiet's design.
I did see the clip. Go watch it. It's incredible. It's just to see. Next on my games list in terms of modding, we have Stardew Valley. Now, although Stardew Valley has done somewhat of a good job in terms of LGBTQ plus representation in the examples of same-sex relationships and marriage and the chance for adoption, the mods you can get for the game sort of take it to a new level, I'd like to say. So you can get a plethora of pride sort of representation, from t-shirts to painting replacement mods, where it's all the different pride flags, to even having your house rainbow coloured, if you so desire. But then there's also a mod that deserves credit, which is the Gender Neutrality Mod. So for those who don't ascribe to male or female, they can download this mod, and it changes the in-game dialogue and all the text and everything to just call you the farmer. So you're not her or him, you are just you. I think it was just very nice to have these sort of options in games, but I don't think it should be up to the modders to have to do this. For an interesting topic of debate in this area, is it right that those who want LGBTQ plus representation in games have to create mods? After all, it is unpaid labour just to feel comfortable when playing your game.
I kind of fully agree with this. This work should already be done, right? But also, I don't like playing devil's advocate here, but some game developers just aren't aware of what queer communities want from gaming, so mods can show them the way, right? Like what happened in The Sims, the mods kind of showed the Sims team the way that they wanted their games to be. It's a tough one because, Stardew Valley, for example, the history of farming games, if that's what you can call it, like Harvest Moon. We didn't include it here, but Harvest Moon DS, and then there was a Japanese game called Harvest Moon DSQ. So Harvest Moon DS, you played a man, and in Harvest Moon DSQ, you played a woman, and you could enact friendships, quote, friendships with other women in the town, but they weren't specifically relationships. So actually, since that game, we've moved quite a bit into the future with Stardew Valley. But yeah, also, why are we still enacting binaries in games? You just don't need them. You just don't. What's the point?
It should be just at least an option. So finally, we're moving on to the future of queer gaming. And the first game is Cyberpunk 2077. So in terms of the future of queer gaming, it looks like CD Projekt Red's Cyberpunk 2077 has some hopeful representation, potentially. So the game is an RPG, role-playing action game. So there have been reports from ERSB, the rating company for just video games in general, that players can select a gender and customize their character. Customization can include depictions of breasts, buttocks and genitalia, as well as various sizes and combinations of genitals. The summary says, it should also be stated, we do know that CD Projekt Red ditched binary gender options last year. This is reflective of the tabletop RPG that was released in 1988. So potentially, from the information that we've been provided, the player may be able to customize their character to their heart's content, without ascribing to too restrictive gender options that most games enforce. If it is as we hope, this game may set a trend in how RPGs are produced in the future. They will create a more free and open playing experience for people of all genders. However, I must reinstate that this is just speculation, and we may not truly know until the game is released. So don't take our word for it like there's hope for. However, to get potentially more information on this subject, check out the Cyberpunk 2077 Night City Wire event on June 24th. That's coming up soon.
This is a game about robotics and enhancements and changing your body, right? So it's quite interesting that we're enacting this ditching of gender binaries and this futuristic view of a queer future, basically.
Yeah.
Within a game that's very futuristic itself.
So the next game we're coming to is The Last of Us 2.
We've not played it. It will be out by the time this podcast goes out. Yeah. Only by a few days, but it will be out. you can see how queer it is for yourself.
So The Last of Us 2 has received a lot of controversy in April of this year, and to be honest, it's ridiculous. This is from an article discussing the drama, and basically people are kicking off because a potentially trans character named Abby is in the game. So Abby's appearance emerged. This character has broad shoulders, muscular arms, and this sparked speculation if the character was trans, despite a total lack of confirmation in the leaked game footage. So there's a small but loud minority of people out there who want to tell you that video games belong to them and not you. The article continues to say, a post about leaks in April from the right-leaning website One Angry Gamer bemoans Naughty Dog's woke anti-Christian agenda while savouring the dismay of fans of Ellie, a character described as the much-beloved lesbian icon for the SJWs who love to sing the game's praise on Twitter but had no intention of buying the game. Maybe people tend to not buy the games because there's lack of representation, because they don't feel comfortable playing them. So the post concludes with the baseless statement that naturally everyone is losing their minds, uniting in mutual disgust. That was the article from One Angry Gamer. But I just think there's no need for people to kick off. It's just childish. They're mad because they're not being represented the whole time, which is hypocritical in itself. Like, people need to show empathy to those who haven't ever been represented or have had little and negative representation, because I can't imagine how that feels. I can only speculate that it's probably like a deep feeling of loneliness, I don't know, and like rejection from just society, which just isn't fair. And that's not what video games are for. Video games are meant to be an escape from the troubles of our society. That's just not possible if they reinforce the same issues. I'm going to finish this discussion, well, my part of the discussion about The Last of Us, by once again quoting this article, because the people or person that wrote it put it best. The old adage, walk a mile in their shoes, means something different when you can quite literally make a character walk with the flick of a joystick, whether that's assuming the role of a created character or making one of your own. That's up to you. What's important is having the option to choose for yourself. So who are games for? The answer is every last one of us.
I think The Last of Us, and I'm quite excited to play The Last of Us 2, and full disclosure, me and Alex play this game together because I don't like the scary bits, so I make him play them. But The Last of Us 2 is going to be quite exciting, right? Yeah. Because, you know, out of all of these things that we've discussed, you know, when is the queer character the centre character? You know, you can make, in a lot of these ways, the queer character the centre character, but for it to be canon that the character is queer, and in essence, in this one, the option is taken away from you. This character is queer, whether you like it or not, it's in your face, and you've got to play as a queer character. And I think that's really interesting. Perhaps some people like the option, but I like this.
I like this.
Yeah, I like this. I think it's a nice way to enact representation by making it undeniable, right? Like, it is there, it's right in your face. People don't see the need for this, but I think what we've quite literally proven is how marginalised queer identities are still in games. Yeah. And how actually this work is quite important. So when we're talking about the future of queer gaming, there can still be games that have straight characters, and there will still be games that have straight characters, but it doesn't always need to be the same. Like, it doesn't always need to have straight characters. I think it's quite interesting to play other people, you know, like that article said, you know, walk in somebody else's shoes. So yeah, to finish, I think that actually,
I think there's hope.
Yeah. I don't want to be that person to be like, oh, there's a lot of hopefulness and we're moving on from the bad queer, like, you know, the bad homophobic, transphobic. You know, we're not in a state now where we can say that there's no transphobia, there's no homophobia, there's no fear of queer people. But actually, what I think we can say is that things are getting a little bit better slowly. You know, there are little bits and pieces. You know, there's still ingrained problems within gaming. I think we're getting somewhere. Yeah. Queerness is existing in gaming. You know, you can't deny queer individuals' existence anymore. So there's no reason not to put queer people in games.
Yeah. Video game producers, this is a message to you. Right. Sort it out.
So before I end, I just want to say that this is the first of 3 sessions. So that my next session, I have a discussion with Nick Cherryman and Jamie Sargent about queer representation in cartoons. The next session will be released on Thursday. The final installment of this kind of podcast series will be released on Saturday, and I sat down with Amy Zala, Sue Lemos, and Daniel Conway to discuss grassroots versus corporate queerness. You know, I hope you give these other podcasts a listen and a look.
Do it. But I really enjoyed doing this because it showed a lot more representation to me that maybe I missed as a child playing these games. And I didn't see the issues there.
And with that, I want to say goodbye see you, and thank you for listening.
Cheers.
And yeah, bye.
Bye.